Uh, I'm honored to be here at a church and speaking about something that's as important as this is. And traveling with Concerned Women for America, that was by happenstance that met the director. There are several mothers that by chance came together. It was by divine intervention that about 7 moms came together. And what happened was we realized our stories were all similar. And that happened about a year ago. We knew things were happening in public education, in our kids' public school, but we didn't know what the name was. We knew things were changing. And my husband, if you don't know, he is a teacher. My mother and father-in-law teachers. So anyone who likes to say I'm anti-teacher is just plain wrong. I'm very pro-teacher for obvious reasons. I'm married to one. But the thing was, what happened was I had investigated education. I knew something was going on about 4.5 years ago in my kids' education. And I'll get into that in a second. But I actually have a Facebook page that's about 6 months old. It's called Missouri Moms Against Common Core. And it's been a real touchstone because I've never done Facebook or social media. I don't let my kids do social media. We don't Instagram, Twitter. We don't do Facebook. We don't do any of it. So for me, it's been kind of interesting to see. It's a real touchstone for parents to share their stories and to learn from each other. So if you have an interest, it's Missouri Moms Against Common Core. But I always start with this, and I'm so lucky to be in a church tonight because I tell people, this is my mission. I mean, I feel like this is my ministry. I don't do this for fun because in traveling, some weeks it gets to be a lot. I have missed football games. Does anybody know what that really means? I'm sure. So if you understand that I've missed football games, you'll understand that I feel very compelled and called to do this. So I've taken about a 6-week sabbatical from traveling and talking about this because sometimes the burden of it gets to be pretty heavy. And at the end of talking, I feel sick to my stomach because I make moms cry. So anyway, but the thing I would commend you, this is what I believe. A nation of well-informed men who have been taught to know and prize the rights which God has given them cannot be enslaved. It is in the region of ignorance that tyranny begins. That's why I'm honored that you're here to learn. There are so many things that we're told every day that aren't quite true. But to go back to the origins of what our country was really founded upon, this is a great place to start. This is the Pilgrims Monument. It's the national monument to our forefathers in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Has anybody ever seen it? I hadn't either, you know? Yeah, but I hadn't either. But what was so compelling and if it takes you back to study, and I encourage you to take some notes if you want to and really go and look at this. But the interesting thing is, if you see it, this is a pillar of faith. This is faith with her hand in the air pointing to heaven. This monument was erected in the 1800s. So the National Monument to the Forefathers, this is from Wikipedia, this is their version, formerly known as the Pilgrim Monument. It commemorates the Mayflower Pilgrims, dedicated on August 1st, 1889. It honors their ideals, and later generally embraced by the United States. It is thought to be the world's largest solid granite monument and is the 3rd tallest statue in the United States. The cool thing about the monument is it really embodies the origins of everything our country was founded upon as believers. It was a pilgrimage from the tyranny that existed. They came to our country to escape what they were facing overseas. They risked everything. I actually, for the sake of, I have 3 kids. I do homeschool one, so I get really excited about history because I've learned so much in the last couple of years by teaching But it's interesting because you have faith, but then at the base of the statue, there are 4 seated, and they actually represent law, morality, education, and liberty. Education was a cornerstone that our country was founded upon. Do you know why they didn't want the slaves to be able to read? Because once you're educated, you can make your own decisions. You come to your own conclusions. They did not want the slaves in the United States to be educated for a reason. To enslave is to capture someone's mind and not allow them to think for themselves. Education was tremendously important to the Pilgrims. Literacy was high, and the breadth of reading of substantial literature higher than even today. They cultivated an entire worldview about life. They had exceptional theological understanding, along with cultural and legal understanding. These came together to introduce self-government into the New World and the first civil covenant. The laws of our country are based on biblical principles. We've forgotten that. But understanding that education is a pillar of what our country was founded upon, that's why I'm here. Abraham Lincoln said, the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. Is that true? Amen, that is true. So what I'm going to start with tonight is the most relevant. We've been in Jefferson City for the last 2 weeks. And a lot of times when I leave, I tell people I just want to take a shower because I don't like it there. I don't like the politics. I'm a political science major, and what a lot of administrators and teachers will say, you need to leave politics out of education. And you know what I say? I didn't put them there. But let me tell you something. The fact is, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but my degrees are in government. I can interpret for you, if you'll let me, what's happening. Because you know how to teach, but I know how to read the documents to show you exactly what's happening. This came out yesterday because we have a bill going through the Missouri legislature. But what I want you to see in just the start, MSEP 5, I'm going to talk about some things, and I'm going to dive right in, and then I'll back kind of out of it. But this news just came out yesterday, and I want to start with this. The Lord kind of led me here tonight. MSEP 5 is the Missouri School Improvement Program. So what happens is if on your test the school gets a bad score, if kids don't score well on the standardized test, MSEP is the piece that accredits all schools. You can lose your accreditation as a district, and if that happens, the state comes in and takes you over. It's everything you don't want to have happen to your school district. But it's a moving target. Our state Department of Education is just about as bad as our federal Department of Education. They're a political machine. They have a very clear political agenda, and it usually doesn't match ours. But the issue with MSEP, what they did yesterday, ACT. Do you know what the ACT is? It's the college entrance exam, right? And the big deal right now with Common Core that you're going to hear is there a set of really high standards that gets kids ready for college and career. So when you hear that, you think, well, that's awesome. It's going to have every kid going to raise that bar real high, and all these kids are going to go to college, and they're going to be ready. But to understand what's really being said, you have to read between the lines. ACT in the state of Missouri, every single junior next year will take the ACT. Even if they're not ready for college, or if they're not going to college, it'll still be mandatory for all juniors. Did anybody hear that news this year? ACT, every junior. But the reason for that is that it says this. This came out of DESE, which is an acronym for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And it says MSEP 5, which is our accreditation piece, adds ACT work keys. And it goes on to say, in support of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education goals, that all students graduate ready for college and career, the department has announced ACT work keys as an additional academic measure that districts and charters can use to gauge students' proficiency. Now stay with me. What happens with this is through your chambers of commerce. Has anybody noticed the chamber is really endorsing a set of standards? Does anybody notice that? The Common Core standards, the Chamber of Commerce is all over it, which is so bizarre. And I'll back out of this in a second, but I want to start with this because you'll understand a little bit more in a minute. But these states, which Missouri's in the middle, we are trying to establish what's called work-ready communities all over our state. So what happens is if you sign your business up as a work-ready community, I'll tell you the story. One of the moms that's traveling with us, her husband is a 30-something. In Arkansas, they've already established work-ready communities. And what happens is he got headhunted for a job. He's skilled labor. He works on machines. So he got headhunted for a job. But in order to even interview for the job that he was headhunted for, he had to take the ACT test. Because the company had signed up as a work-ready community, a work-ready business. The fact is he took that test with 20 other men, He was the only man to pass the test. Once he passed it, he got a certificate of completion. He can work because he has a certificate. Without the certificate, you don't work. The ACT will determine, do kids go to college or do they go into the workforce? And depending on what level their certificate actually reads, they've aligned with the Common Core. And this will make more sense. Like I said, I felt compelled to start with this, but know this, the ACT has aligned with the Common Core standards. And what that means to us, I thought there was another slide, I put that in today. But pay attention to what the standards really mean. Because when you understand as we get more and more into this, that in order to work, you'll have to be aligned to a certain school of thought that someone actually has control over, that isn't necessarily just our government, but private entities. Who are those private entities? How far does our government reach into those standards that will literally control everything that happens in our school districts? How well will your child perform on the ACT test will determine where he works, if he works, his course. So we're in huge rejection of what that represents to us for many, many reasons. But I'm going to start with a quick video. The Homeschool Legal Defense Association, the HSLDA, has put out an awesome video called Building the Machine. And this is a trailer. And what you'll see is this trailer is filled with mostly progressives. They're collegiate types. They're academians. But even they're against Common Core for what it represents. Because a lot of people like to say, well, it's just all you crazy Christians and conservatives that are against it. That's not true. When you see this video, the majority, 95%, probably don't fall under that category.
These are 45 states that have voluntarily come together to create fewer, higher, deeper standards. They're world class.
The 5 people who didn't agree to sign the letter simply were expunged from the record.
The real issue in American education is that people without a whole lot of experience are dictating education policy.
I'm trying to think of something analogous to this that slipped through so easily on a national basis. And I really can't.
Is the most meaningful reform of our public schools in a generation.
Common Core.
Throw away their local standards. And so I think just being straightforward, continuing to tell the truth is very important.
We had to sign a confidentiality agreement that we would not ever discuss what took place in the meeting itself.
Protest against Common Core.
It's controversial.
Race to the middle.
The biggest misconception that Common Core proponents push on people is that there is any evidence that a system like Common Core will benefit children.
To do education reform right, you need standards, but you also need greater parental choice. And I think the best argument for this Common Core are the standards themselves.
It takes power from the parent. It de-incentivizes the parent from a deep and abiding interest in their child's education.
A Maryland parent
was arrested last week after speaking out about Common Core.
Don't stand for this. You're sitting here like cattle. You have questions. You put them. They don't want it.
They're not accountable to the public.
What is the best case scenario that you foresee?
I don't see any.
Show us the most innovative plans to improve teacher quality and student achievement, we'll show you the money. We launched a competition called Race to the Top. And these standards were developed, by the way, not by Washington, but by Republican and Democratic governors throughout the country.
The Common Core is a project of 2 organizations in Washington, D.C.
People need to know about the Common Core because standards undergird everything in the education system.
The federal government was pushing states to align.
They're trying to quantify everything, and this will make it all right. No, we'll be a nation where nobody's brilliant.
The people who support Common Core believe in elites and bureaucrats telling thousands of other people what to do.
You remember The Wizard of Oz, where he was a little man standing behind the big controls, but in this case, there isn't even a little man.
It came out. If you want to watch it, it's called Building the Machine. You can Google or Bing it and pull it up. And it'll go into a lot of things I'll talk about tonight. But my story, I'll start with, those are my three. That's my Sophie. She's 16. She's a sophomore. Bo is an 8th grader, and Bear's 9. I homeschool Bear. And my story starts, and some of you probably know a little bit about my story. When Bo was a 3rd grader, we jumped off the math cliff in Camdenton. And for me as the mama, he would come home every night, and he would bring home 5 word problems. Well, he couldn't read because he was in something called Pt-1, which I didn't realize at the time, but tons of kids were. So I would sit at the table with him, and I would read these word problems to him, and we would extrapolate the numbers, and we would do 28 plus 12, carry the 1, and he would take all of his answers back, and they would come back, every one counted wrong. So I would call the teacher. I'm like, hey, because keep in mind, I'm like the room mom. I make the cupcakes, and I pick the kids up after school, and I shuttle everybody, and I'm that mom. I'm the cheerleader mom until, well, I still am, but I mean, I was the mom that did all the stuff. I mean, one of those moms. So I call him like, hey, yeah, what's up with the math? I know those problems were right, but what's up with that? She's like, oh, it's not about the answer anymore. It's about the process. Well, I didn't know what that meant. So I'm like, what? He got the right answer. We showed his work. What do you mean process? I did not understand. So my questions, I'm very inquisitive. You don't tell me something and not tell me what it means. And I'm kind of menacing that way because I need to understand. I mean, I really am menacing. I need to know why. I am a true Missouri born and bred. Show me, tell me something. But what happened was we went to the principal, who's a dear person, and I appreciate that person very much, but sat down and said, okay, are they going to learn multiplication tables? Because my son was a 3rd grader. He was like, no, we're a 21st generation learner, or 21st century learner. We don't believe in multiplication tables. Rote memorization is a waste of brain power. And I said, Jeff was with me, and he knows rarely am I at a loss for words, but I was at a loss for words that night. I mean, that day I was just looking like, are you kidding me? And he said that. We're a 21st generation. We're a generation of cell phones. My hand to God, we're a generation of cell phones and calculators. We don't need to learn that. That's where my journey started. Do you know what I did? Bo was in something called Pt-1 reading at the time. And the trust that I had for the teachers, I loved the teachers. But what happened was I pulled him out of Pt-1 reading because my head was spinning. And you know what I told people? I said, you know what? If you're willing to let somebody tell you that 3 plus 3 doesn't equal 6, and that you can't help your kid with math, this is way bigger, guys. There is something wrong. I can help my 3rd grader with math, but if you're willing to let somebody tell you it doesn't, there's something way more going on here. Because we would go to these math nights, and we were told, don't try to help your kids. You will only confuse them. This is the higher, better way. That's just really hard for me. I didn't buy that. I had a Sophie who has always ranked, got the top score on the MAP test in the math. And I don't know if she's really that smart or not, or we just believe the old-fashioned way. But my kids do standard algorithm, carrying, borrowing, that stuff. What it looks like now, this is a word problem, and if you have kids in school, you'll understand this. Every time I see a math word problem, it looks like this. If I have 10 ice cubes and you have 11 apples, how many pancakes will fit on the roof? Answer, purple, because aliens don't wear hats. And I would say, but where are the numbers? Where are the numbers? So I just became obsessed with what is going on? And I didn't know. I was on all these math forums and national math forums, and what happened was I went to the principal. I did the chain of command. And I went to the principal, I went to the superintendent, and they would look at me I would just ask questions like I had 3 eyes. I went to the school board, and I learned real quick, you're not allowed to ask questions. Well, I didn't know that. Somebody's going to tell me something. That did not happen. Immediately, these stories come out. She hates teachers. She's against the school. She hates the school. I'm like, what? That is so not true. My husband works at the school. I just want somebody to tell me Columbia, Missouri had done this math for 8 years and dropped it. Somebody make me love it. Surely somebody knows why we're doing this. And they would look at me like I had 3 eyes. So they would just look at me. No answers ever. So it was incredibly frustrating because math problems would look like this. What we understand, like for example, 36 times 12. Sophie would bring home, she would do 8 times 7 equals 56 and get it counted wrong because she didn't draw 56 stick people in 5th grade. So then I would be like, what? She would have to draw it. And that would just cause her so much stress. But this is how we're doing math. We're not becoming the fastest, most efficient problem solvers. We are, as Dr. Wayne Cooper told me 4.5 years ago, it's the intentional dumbing down of a generation. And I'm a fighter, in case you didn't know that. You don't just say, you need to sit down and be quiet. I'm like, I'm not sitting down. I got some righteous fire. I ain't sitting down. No, you need to tell me why. And my husband, he's so nice. If you know Jeff, does anybody know Jeff? Oh my gosh, is he the nicest ever? And all the time he's like rubbing his head with me. And I'm like, I am sorry, but I am not sitting down. No. So I try to move away from him. Just sit down. But the thing is, what was happening all along and what nobody in our state knew, it was Common Core. It had come into our state. 3 plus 3, they talk about it's rigorous. 3 plus 3 equals, explain. But that's what's happening. First graders, 3 plus 3 equals 6, explain. They can't. I can't. But they call that rigorous. Just because it's hard doesn't mean it's better. First graders don't have the ability to answer these kind of questions. They're going to tell you it's just math and English language arts. Not true. I'll show you why. Myth versus reality. Let me tell you, these crazy moms from all over the state, and there are literally thousands of us now, we found each other. And our stories all sound the same. And so we have this real cathartic thing going on because we're all a bunch of fighters. But what's happened is we've taken on the education establishment in Jefferson City in Missouri, and they've all told us, don't bother. You're up against billions of dollars. And I looked at them and said, do you know who my God is? If we are in his favor and under his covering, it doesn't matter how much money they have. I would rather be in the palm of his hand and standing for what is right. And if it's not right to stand for my children, I don't know what is. I will fight for your kids if you'll fight for mine. And that's been our motto. I'll fight for yours if you fight for mine. And it's taken hold. I don't care what political affiliation you are. I could care less. When your kid is suffering, I don't say, what's your party? Okay. No, we don't care. We just know kids are suffering all across the state. What happened in May of last year, and where we started to see things going, was that DESE, which is the Department of Education in Missouri, we started to kind of come together and fight and realize we had power at the state level to fight this. So we started making a noise that they started to hear in Jefferson City. We started to really make an impact. So the Department of Education hurried up before the end of session because we had a bill on the table, and they held meetings to let everybody know what Common Core was because nobody had even heard of it. I didn't even know what Common Core was. I knew what it was, but I didn't know what it was called until about 1.5 years ago. But what happened, they had meetings all across the state, and one was in Camdenton. And what happened was you came into the meeting, and there were about 100 people there, and there was a guy in a nice suit. And what he did is he said, he reads from a script. I'm from DESE, I'm here tonight, but I will not answer any questions. If you have questions, write them down, and I will take them back to the department, and we'll post the answers on our website. It's called the Delphi. They move you into a bunch of different tables. You have a facilitator, so nobody can talk. Well, in other parts of the state, that didn't go so well. In Lindbergh, and there's about 3 of the crazy moms in that crowd. They're worse than me, if that's possible. But they are. That meeting was almost a full-out riot. Parents have questions. Someone please answer our questions. Not talking points. There's a big difference, guys. You hear a lot of talking points. For the educated parent, I have legitimate questions, and my kid is in the middle of it. Somebody answer a question. They almost had a riot. The lady was crying. You can actually Google this and see this video. It's an 8-minute video. The poor Desi lady was almost in tears. I felt sorry for her. It wasn't a good situation. But this is a video that what started to happen is we started to really come together. And what we started to realize was that our fight looked just like the fight in Ohio and Indiana and Kansas and Maryland. This happened in Maryland about 4 to 6 weeks after our meeting. And it looked scarily like the meeting Desi had where they came in and all these parents had all these questions about the standards. Would you hit this video for me?
I know I'm speaking out of turn, but I'd like to take Mr. Bailey's advice and kind of challenge you guys on the spot.
Can you hold on for 1 minute? Because many questions actually dovetail from that. Okay. And so I'm trying them all together. So I want to get to as many as we can. I do want to get to as many questions as we can. So
you're hearing the facilitator, and a parent has stood up, and he has questions. He's not going to sit down anymore. He's got questions. And this is the State Board of Education just sitting there looking shell-shocked, and a lady's videoing with her phone. This is the dad.
I struggle with all of this. I grew up there, not the best schools. I still think they're not the best schools, but I love.
Sir, I will say this. Out of all fairness,
I went to Essex Community College. I finished at the University of Maryland. And now I moved my family out to Howard County because of the reputation of the schools.
Okay, so in all fairness to other parents who submitted questions, I do want to be fair, sir.
Community college. And, it's so
sir.
My question is, how are we talk about college, you're not talking about which colleges, you're not preparing them for World Harvard. Okay, my question is, how is lowering America's educational standards to prepare kids for community college? Because that's what it's all about. Because you mentioned before, the emphasis is, and I have some stuff here to quote before this guy tries to carry me out.
Okay.
But, hey, listen, parents, take control. This is not a CNN political debate. Let's go.
Let him ask his question.
This is what I will say, in fairness to everyone who asked questions, we do have some that are dovetailing to that.
Let him ask his question.
So the next question. So this is a dovetail.
Don't stand for this. You're sitting here like cattle. You have questions. You confront them. They don't want to do it in public.
Okay, the next.
Excuse me, buddy. Hey, this is America. This is not a CNN political debate. You're managing to go through what.
He was arrested. He faced 6 months. 6 months. For, I think it was disturbing the peace until it went viral. If you think this is not happening in your state, you are wrong. Parents are being villainized for asking questions, and no one's answering. So anyway, for me, that made me mad. Because there needs to be answers, right? If you're on the up and up, you have answers, you're proud. But I knew because the Spirit led me when the math wasn't the math. And by the way, we pulled our son out of reading when that whole math thing came down. We put him with a tutor at night who was a teacher. But she could teach him at night what they wouldn't let her teach him during the day. He was never taught phonics. Do you know what happened in about 4 to 6 weeks? My son was reading at grade level. I saved my son. I didn't allow him to be a statistic or a number. I became an advocate, an unapologetic advocate at that point. That's why I travel around the state and tell my story, because it's legitimate. But anyway, I met this lady. I went to this little place called East Newton, little bitty farm town. They're precious people. They're not terrible. They don't have a lot of college degrees. Doesn't matter. They're very smart people. But what happened was I went and did a meeting of about 60 people. Well, that meeting grew to a second meeting that was about 185. And what happened was they had heard me talk, so they said, Desi, please come. Tell us why this is so wonderful. Please send somebody. And they sent this letter. And Desi sent them this response. They said, thank you for your invitation. I checked with Dr. Cooper, the assistant commissioner, to see if the department would be expending any more resources on individual community meetings. He indicated that our open meetings have been held and we would not be presenting at other meetings. But he said this. He said there is an abundance of information on the department's website, and he gave the address. In addition, on that site, there are PDF links to the list of questions that came out of each of our 8 regional meetings on May 2nd. And I'm told that there will soon have a link to the answers. Do you think this has been almost a full year? Do you think we've ever seen answers? Not ever. Well, these people are pretty spunky, and they said, thanks for posting other people's questions on the website, but we already have questions. Well, we don't have our answers. Since this will be implemented in the fall of this year, it'd be nice to have answers sometime. Never have gotten them. But what happened was the war started between Desi and the moms. They like to call us a small but vocal group. They're right about one thing. We are very vocal, but we're not that small. Because what's happened, and you really do your research, the Republican National Committee, the RNC, in April of 2012 actually signed a resolution to the party platform, actually denouncing Common Core as a party on the national level. That's happened. Why do people not know about that? They tell you that we're small. That's a lie. We're not a small bunch. The states in the blue never adopted Common Core. All the states in red have active legislation right now fighting these standards. Why, do you ask? Why? What's the big deal about standards? It's a lot more than standards. The recent headlines in March of this year, Hoosiers, Indiana rejects Common Core and call for state autonomy. This was our state capital in February. Our fight was ramping up, and it still is. We're exponentially, these are the moms. We brought our children to the Capitol to show them what their Constitution should look like. You have rights as an American to ask questions, and it's okay to expect answers. And we showed them that day. That got us a lot of attention because we packed out that place with over almost 600 moms and dads showed up. Here's some of the cute Missouri kids that all had signed. You have awoken my mommy. And that's not my kid. Politico, they like to say it's a bunch of conservatives. What happened? Now know this, okay? In the state of New York, did you guys hear race to the top? Have you ever heard that term? Race to the top is Common Core. That's what it is. Except when you sign a race to the top grant or you get the money, you expedite it because you have to, through contractual obligation, you have to implement all facets of Common Core. It's not just standards. There are many facets to it. But what happened in New York, they're about 3 years ahead of us. The wheels are coming off in New York. Now keep in mind, common standards to every state, common tests, we all have the same test, will render common results. Because the curriculum will align when the test bears as much weight as it does. But what happened in New York, Politico, this just happened in January of this year. The largest teachers union in the state of New York unanimously rejected Common Core because the teachers were screaming so loud at what harm it was doing to the children, and they couldn't teach it. So the largest union unanimously withdrew its support for Common Core as they have been implemented, a major blow to Common Core advocates who have been touting support from teachers as proof that the standards will succeed. We'll have to be the first to admit it's failed, said Richard Nunez, president of the New York State Teachers Union. In our Senate hearings in Missouri, we packed the room out with a bunch of moms, and we sat there. They'd never seen anything like it. Nobody's ever taken on the education establishment. Nobody. Nobody who's ever thought they had a prayer. Let me tell you something. When you're a mom with kids, you don't mess with a mom and her kids. Because they will show up in Jefferson City and bring their kids. And they did. It was awesome because there's a guy named Ron Calzone, and what happens is your voice is starting to be heard because a lot of people who are working who can't be there, he sends out something called a witness form where you can write how you feel about a bill, and they carry it in. Well, they do that on gun issues, and they do that like Second Amendment stuff and all these different bills. In less than 48 hours, 1,300 witness forms from all corners of the state were carried in a huge stack and dropped in front of the witness chair. This is a huge issue, and it's not popular. Anyway, that was a pretty powerful moment. The NEA recently also slammed Common Core, which is a big deal. The Missouri Farm Bureau opposed it in March of this year. So what's the big deal? Congress in February of this year. Guys, people are catching on. So now you're going, what's the big deal, right? It's just standards. I'm going to skip to this. You're going to hear things like, it's college and career ready. Make your kids college and career ready. It's rigorous. 21st century skills, they'll be globally competitive. But you see weird things like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce endorsing a set of standards. Is that weird? Kinda. It's kind of weird. The PTA, ExxonMobil. You're going to hear things like the Census Bureau reports that for kids who move, they need to be able to, like if you go to Wyoming from Missouri, it's kind of like buying a Whopper. You need to know what you're going to be doing. The problem is competition is not a bad thing. You know, competition among states is not a bad thing because when kids they take, what's the one, I'm blanking, I'm a little tired tonight. What's the one, the test that the NAEP? Well, that's a national test. The ACT is a national test. The SAT is a national test. We compare kids all the time. We don't need standards that match. They're going to tell you they're internationally benchmarked. That is not true. There is no empirical evidence that proves these standards have ever been tried anywhere before, ever. But you're told that. We've asked over and over and over, show us the evidence. They say that our kids are behind all these other countries. But does China educate every child K through 12 regardless of disability? No. Does Afghanistan or Pakistan? No. We're comparing apples to create a crisis. Arnie Duncan recently said, the United States has a unique opportunity to transform our education system in ways that will resonate for decades to come. Last year and this year, the federal government provided, they're going to tell you the federal government has had nothing to do with Common Core, but right here in a speech he gave to UNESCO, he said the federal government provided unprecedented funds to support education reform. The federal government has had everything to do with this. I'm going to skip these couple things real quick. Although Mike and Amy, being teachers, you'll find this interesting. ESEA it's the equivalent to No Child Left Behind. Elementary and Secondary Education Act is the same thing as No Child Left Behind. In our application for the waiver, our Commissioner of Ed, she actually points out, from 93 until 2010, Missouri operated under highly regarded contents and performance standards that specified what students should know and be able to perform at each grade level and upon graduating. Missouri state standards have been acclaimed nationally as among the top 3 in the nation. We have the top 3 standards in the country. Why would we abandon them? Well, No Child Left Behind put us on the fast track, but we abandoned something that violates 3 federal statutes in the 10th Amendment. The federal statutes are GEPA, the General Education and Provisions Act, that talks about no provision or applicable program shall be construed to authorize any department, agency, office, or employee the right to exercise any direction, supervision, or control over the curriculum program. You get the picture. The federal government cannot. Do you realize that there was no federal Department of Education until 1976? Didn't even exist. It was all about local control, state autonomy. So from 1976 until now, why do we not want the federal government in control of education? Do you understand what the centralization of the message means? That if one entity has full control of the message, what can they do with that? Control everything. That's where we're headed. Anyway, the other laws, Department of Education Organization Act, and the Elementary and ESEA as amended by No Child Left Behind. The revised statutes in Missouri, I'm going to skip it because there's so much more I got to get into. But there's so many statutes that prove, what? Oh, I got 2, but there's so much. Oh, there's so much. So much good stuff. Let's get past this law stuff. They talk about it being state-led. Here's where we get into the meat. Common Core has nothing to do with standards. It's about control. You're messaged. They're just standards. You're not for standards. You want dumb kids? We already had great standards. It has nothing to do with standards. It's all about the control. The fact is, the Common Core standards are owned by 2 private trade organizations, okay? That means if you want to know something that happened in the development of the standards and you go and you present a sunshine request, they basically thumb their nose at you. They have to do nothing. They're private. They own our standards. The other thing is, the 2 states can only sign on to those standards in full, and they're copyrighted. I'm sorry, I have a little overlap on that. The 2 organizations, you're going to hear people say, well, the governors did it. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. The National Governors Association is one of the entities that owns the standards. But when we've tried to find out or get a list of how many governors belong, they don't tell us anything. For all we know, 6 governors belong to the NGA. The National Governors Association sounds very authoritative. It's private. The governor of Maine says this, I don't believe in Common Core, I believe in raising standards. He actually commented that he dropped his membership to the NGA. How do governors really feel about Common Core? Well, all of these governors, Haley, Deal, Pence, Bentley, Rick Perry, they're all against Common Core in their states. And a lot of them have signed resolutions actually denouncing it. Rick Perry from Florida pulled his state out of the testing entity. This is Governor Branstad from Iowa. He signed an executive order a few weeks ago addressing the crisis of Common Core in our country. Indiana, just a couple weeks ago, dropped the Common Core educational standards. The other entity, CCSSO, the Council of Chief State School Officers. Sounds very authoritative, right? But when you go to their website, they say this. It's a private organization, guys. We're transforming our nation's public education systems. They say that we have over 100 meetings per year, but all of them are closed to the public. It's by invitation only. The problem is they own what our kids are learning. The standards are copyrighted. You can go to this is the corestandards.org website to see the standards. They're copyrighted, and it tells you here that they're owned by the NGA and CCSSO. In the Federal Register, a lot of schools will say, no, we get to adapt them and change them and kind of play with them. The Federal Register, as recorded July 29th, 2009, says this. Common set of K through 12 standards means a set of content standards that define what students must know and be able to do and are identical across states in a consortium. Identical does not mean you can change them. That's a problem. Because when you understand from the core standards writers, they tell you they're a living work. A living work is okay. You can change standards as long as your teachers have the ability to do that. Or the professionals who see they're not working, they have the ability. But because they're copyrighted and owned as a state, we have no ability to change any of it. They're owned, and we're warned that they're copyrighted. And when they say they're a living work, that means those same 2 entities can change them, but at their will, not ours. And we'll get into a little more next week who actually those people are. But know this, they say the standards are intended to be a living work, and as new and better evidence emerges, the standards will be revised accordingly. That's very dangerous, because once they've got us all in, they can do whatever they want. Who are they? Who are they? Well, I know that answer, but we don't have time to get fully into that tonight. But this is the other thing that's really troubling. When you read, you go to there, they talk about limitation on liability, okay? And this is what they say on the standards. What NGA and CCSSO, their respective subsidiaries, affiliates, licensors, service providers, content providers, employees, agents, officers, and directors will not be liable for any incidental, direct, indirect, punitive, actual, consequential, special, exemplary, or other damages, including loss of revenue or income, pain and suffering, emotional distress. For standards? Do you wonder what that's all about? It'll make sense next week. So great to have 2 whole weeks. Golly, I love that. But here, we'll get into this, and I'll close for this time in a little bit. Players. Who are the players? Who are they? Who are they? Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Do you know who that is? It's like this rich guy who just loves giving his money away. Know this, understand this. He's a 501c4. What a 501c4 means is that he gets a tax break by giving money to his pet projects of choice to benefit his goals and objectives. But it actually talks about this. William H. Gates is his father. His father was the head of Planned Parenthood. In a PBS interview with his father not too long ago in 2007 with Bill Moyer, his father was quoted as saying that he believed humans were reckless breeders and weeds in need of culling. That's Bill Gates' father. He was the head of Planned Parenthood. Who are they? Right? Who are they? Know this, when you go to the Gates Foundation, because they're a 501c4, they have to disclose all the places they give their money. I'm sure they wish that we didn't have access to it, but look at us. The Pioneer Foundation, and this is just a little teeny snapshot. But when you start looking, look here. There's the Council of Chief State School Officers. Well, what? $8 million. There it is again. The Fordham Institute, who's been in Jefferson City testifying all the time about how wonderful the standards are. National Council of La Raza. There's Common Core Inc. When you understand that the Gates Foundation has given, as of 2011, $7.3 million to the NEA, to the AFT, $11 million, Parents PTA, $2.7, the National Governors, here's your biggies right here. National Governors Association, $25 million, and the Council of Chief State School Officers, almost $80 million. Who's educating your children? He stands to make literally billions. He will own your children. I'll show you a little bit more about that in just a second. Here's his dad right here. And this is where it says, Bill Gates admitted that his father used to be the head of Planned Parenthood, which was founded on the concept that most human beings are just reckless breeders and human weeds in need of culling. The other part, understand this, the United Nations, UNESCO is the United Nations education branch, okay, of the United Nations. As a woman, a Christian, an American, I'm offended by the United Nations. That is like godly right there. That's like my confirmation that I'm right on that. That's like God saying, yes, you should be. Anyway, but you go in. Now here's the biggie for me. Because, I'll be up at night, and for those of you who know me, you know I'm dogged. I can't let it go, and it'll be like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'll be reading something, and my face will be illuminated blue, and Jeff will go, what are you reading? I'm like, I'm reading the United Nations document with Microsoft. And he's like, something is wrong with you. I know. But anyway, this document, it says this, the Microsoft supports the objectives of UNESCO as stipulated in UNESCO's constitution and intends to contribute to UNESCO's program priorities. If you know anything about that, UNESCO's constitution is called the Earth Charter. It's nothing like our Bill of Rights. Nothing. Our Bill of Rights talks about our inalienable rights are given by God, that no man can give and no man can take away. That's how our country was founded. But what they believe, it was written in 1999 by Stephen Rockefeller, Maurice Strong, and Mikhail Gorbachev. They took this Earth Charter and put it in a mock Ark of the Covenants. This comes from, I think, Wikipedia. No, the Modern History Project. And they did pagan dances around the Earth Charter and commemorating its significance. Who are they? Who are they? How much more time do I have, Pastor Jerry? Okay. Here's the thing. Now go back with me to when Arnie Duncan said that, these are internationally benchmarked standards, right? He said that. The problem is we can read. And all of his speeches are documented on the Federal Department of Education's website. So one night my face was illuminated with white And I was reading this speech, and know what he said to UNESCO. He was giving this speech out of the United States and to UNESCO, right? And he's making fun of us. He says districts now have to engage in interventions to foster dramatic change in these schools. He said this will be some of the hardest and most controversial and most important work you will see coming from the United States this school year and in the years ahead. I said earlier that the United States now has a unique opportunity to transform our education system in ways that will resonate for decades to come. Last year and this year, the federal government provided unprecedented funds to support education and reform. But here's your kicker. In the state of Missouri, we've had the standards for 5 years, but we've not had the test yet. That is the companion to the standards. We've never seen it. So basically, we got a No Child Left Behind waiver, which what that means is we couldn't be sanctioned. They basically had to be 100% proficient. 100% of students had to be 100% proficient by 2014, which was impossible. They knew that. They knew that, right? So what happened was we got a waiver. Our teachers were handed standards without the gavel over their heads, or without the hatchet. And the teachers were said, here, teach, be free to teach. They did it by design that way because the tests haven't showed up yet. They will be here next year. And when that happens, everything will change. Because Bill Gates says when the tests are aligned to the standards, common standards, the curriculum will line up as well. And that will unleash powerful market forces in the service of better teaching. Now understand where we're going. Bill Gates says, because everyone's telling you, don't worry, we have local control. We can teach whatever we want. My foot. That is not true. Because when those tests show themselves for the first time, they'll teach what causes them to perform the best on those tests. And that's what he's talking about. That's when the curriculum will finally drop in. And guess who gets rich? He does. Because here's a biggie. Please know this. ACT is owned by Pearson. Pearson Publishing has about a 76% market share worldwide in textbook publishing. They own the ACT as of recently. They're doing our test, the SBAC test. But know this, Pearson, Sir Michael Barber, he is the chief education advisor at Pearson, and it's the largest textbook publisher in the world. He says, if you want irreversible reforms, work on the culture and the minds of teachers and parents, he says. This is important, otherwise parents or traditionalists might repeal what's been done because of their wish for the past. He defines sustainable reform as irreversible reform and aims to make it so it can never go back to how it was before. Now know this, you can watch this whole speech, you YouTube it, Whole System Revolution. But when you say, who are they? The second list comes from Huffington Post. The second largest shareholder in Pearson is Muammar Gaddafi's son. He owns 24 million shares of Pearson. So what we're hearing come just flooding us all the time is the Muslim influence. There was a story that came out a couple days ago, and I'm so connected nationally now on this thing, that in California, they wanted kids to write about in a close reading how the Holocaust was a fable. That's what's coming. But what's interesting is that Pearson and Bill Gates just recently formed a partnership. Guess what they're going to create? The online curriculum. Remember what he said, how when the tests finally get here? It says the Pearson Foundation announced a partnership with Bill and Melinda Gates to support America's teachers, of course, by creating a full series of digital instructional resources. This is Bill Gates. Would you play this for me?
In terms of standards, the state-led Common Core State Standards Initiative is developing clear, rigorous standards that will match the best in the world. Last month, 46 governors and chief state school officers made a public commitment to embrace those standards. This is encouraging, but identifying common standards is just the starting point. We'll only know if this effort has succeeded when the curriculum and tests are aligned to these standards.
Not until they can fully control the message, because we have common standards, common tests, will beget common curriculum. There's a reason we did it, and we'll get into it more. Bill Gates also said, it'd be great if this stuff worked, but we're not going to know that for 10 years. This is not about children. It's not about raising the bar or making them smarter. It's about control. It's about money. Our kids were for sale. What I'll show you next week will make you physically, this is when the moms cry on me, and I feel just terrible most of the times. What I'll show you next week, it's the powerful reality of where we are as a country. We are called to a higher purpose. We're called to knowledge and truth. The truth is hard to hear sometimes. It's hard to tell sometimes. And that's where people are like, aren't you worried? You're telling all these people this, aren't you? I'm not afraid. I got God on my side, man. Let me tell you, as of today, I walked in here and I was on the phone when I walked in. I get goosebumps, like Holy Spirit goosebumps, because you know what happened today? We have a bill working its way through the House in the Missouri legislature. And what's been awesome is all these crazy moms that are super smart are traveling with the message of truth. Our messages are all different because one's a teacher, one has her doctorate in education, a couple of them are like professionals who no longer are in their field. They're phenomenal women. I'm so honored to be amongst them. There are hundreds of us now that are sharing the truth, because I don't ask you to believe me. I ask you to learn how to ask the questions and never be afraid to ask questions and expect answers. But what happened today and where we're at right now, and please pray, because where we're at right now is we have a bill moving through the Missouri legislature that would be the first of its kind in our country. Well, Indiana has a bill that's similar, but ours is better. Because what will happen with that bill effectively, and we've passed it through the House and the Senate, but what will effectually happen with the bill that we have is that it will kill Common Core in Missouri and cause us to get out of from the ownership of two private trade organizations and copyrighted standards. We've asked, we want to own our own standards. We want to have control of what our children are taught. We want to be able to adapt those. If a teacher tells us they're not working, we want to be able to adapt. We don't want to be chained to standards that are failing or indoctrinating or leading our kids in a bad direction, that commit us to buying curriculum that's nothing that we would want. You know what? They were going to conference tonight. It's probably going to be voted on Monday or Tuesday. We got it out of the House and the Senate. In some ways, there's a long way to go, but if we do it, you know, all those people who told us, there's a bunch of moms, you can't take on the education lobby. They're way too much money. Like I said, do you know my God? Have you met him? Because you know what? Where he leads, he goes before you. A lot of times I'll be like, Lord, I do not know what I am walking into. He's like, it's okay, I'm already there. And that's really what he tells me. It's okay, I'm already there. Like sometimes I go into scary situations where there's a room of 200 people and I don't know if they're nice or not nice. I don't know if I have to put my mean hat on or not, you know? And I go by myself. I don't know what I'm going to get. It's like, Lord, just go before me. I'm already there. I commend you for being here and learning. As moms, to the moms, I'll speak to you. Our children are chosen children. No matter how old they are, they're chosen to be born in such a time as this. For us to raise up children who, in spite of this, know who they are. I'll close with this one story. My Sophie was in her AP government class. And her teacher started bloviating about God and Muhammad were the same. And Sophie said, you're lying. Were any of you in that class? Sophie said, that's a lie. And he says, you need to sit down. She goes, you need to tell the truth. And, and he said, you're proselytizing. She goes, you're not telling the truth. You're lying to this whole class. I will not sit down. And he told her, he said, separation of church and state. She goes, that's the First Amendment. I have a right to speak. You are the state. My husband called, he's like, uh-oh, we got a problem. We got a problem in government class. But you got to teach your kids who they are. I tell parents, because parents get so upset when I talk about this, and you should. But you know what I say? Teach them first who they are in Jesus Christ, and second, who they are as Americans. And man, we'll take over the world. They got to have courage and a fire in their belly. He's gone before us. Let's go claim what's ours. We cannot do that with a spirit of fear. We have to raise leaders who are not afraid to speak the truth and expect answers. But I thank you so much for coming. I'll wrap up and give it back to you, Pastor Jerry. And we'll, next week, if you guys want to bring people, like I said, it gets much more in depth. I'll show you a lot of what's happening in New York, a lot of the curriculum stuff that we're seeing. I'll connect the dots for you, and I'll just tell you this. In the state of Missouri, the reason that governors signed on, and our governor did it unilaterally without legislative approval. Nobody knew about it. One vote, one signature did this. But the reason he did it was because we got stimulus. It was $1.7 billion in stimulus money that our governor took for his commitment to reform education in 4 areas in Missouri. And we'll go over that next week. But he sold our kids. And now we've been telling on him for the last year and a half, and he is in hot water. Because did you know yesterday they took him, they vetoed the tax cut bill, and long story short, he vetoed it too early. They took it to the floor yesterday, and they overrode him. They're not happy with him right now. And we've had a part in that. So I thank you. I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you, Pastor Jerry.